In cities and larger towns, the diversity of what's on our plate has shrunken considerably. You can just do a easy experiment at home. You go and ask your mom and dad how much they ate, how many vegetables they ate growing up, and you ask if you have grandparents around. You ask them how many vegetables they ate, and you'll see that it's almost like an inverted pyramid. I've done this experiment when I've spoken to larger groups, and inevitably everyone's not eating more than 20-25 vegetables throughout the course of the year. I think also the repertoire of dishes that we're eating is getting more and more homogenized. The butter chicken culture is basically trickling down to our homes as well.
This is the 50th episode of Maharani Talks, and my guest is this really cool chef who's also equally a very sweet person to talk to. When I announced who my 50th guest was on my Insta, quite a few people messaged me saying they were big fans of his work. Not surprising, considering he was the former executive chef of the Bombay Canteen, a restaurant that was included in Conde Nast Traveller's 100 Places in the World to Eat in 2016. Chef Thomas Zacharias, who was also voted as the best chef in India in 2018, is now keen to create a community around our rich Indian food legacy through his latest venture, the Locavore, and in the process, put the spotlight back on the best and oft-forgotten regional dishes and cuisines. He's among the forefront of people championing the cause of local ingredients and to ultimately make an impact through food. So join us in this interesting conversation with your host, as always, Mahati Rangarajan. Welcome to Maharani Talks, Chef Thomas Zacharias.
Thank you so much for having me, Mahati. Is that how you pronounce your name, Mahati?
Yes, you got it right. Very few get it right in the first instance, by the way. So, Chef, I know you have mentioned many times how your grandmother played a huge role in your love for food and cooking. Is there any particular fond memory of her or of her food that you really remember and you cherish?
Yeah, I mean, there are several. I was very young when I started spending a lot of time in my grandmother's kitchen because both my parents had jobs. So a lot of afternoons, weekends, summer holidays were spent in my grandmother's home in Cochin. And because she spent a lot of time experimenting with recipes and cooking for us and things like that, by default, if I had to spend time with her, I had to spend my time in the kitchen. And that's how my fondness for cooking started developing. I think some of my fondest memories have been around, like the fishmonger coming to the back door with fresh catch. I still remember like sardines, especially like glistening sardines, which at a certain point of the year are so fatty that she would fry them without any masala and with the scales on. And they kind of like fry and steam inside their scales at the same time. And once they're fried, you just peel them off very slowly and kind of eat them. And now, I mean, like you hardly see sardines being eaten anywhere. We used to call it chala in Malayalam. But also like I realized this much later, but I grew up eating like local and seasonal vegetables. So things like jackfruit seeds, which only in the summer we would get, or kurka, which is this tuber. It's also known as Chinese potato. And there's a certain like romance and excitement about waiting for these vegetables to come in a season every year, and a kind of like sadness when it's kind of going out of season, and like those kind of feelings you don't really like get anymore. So I think for me, it's these experiences with that I shared with her around things that were local, seasonal, very brief and like momentary that I really cherish.
And I'm sure if you smell sardines now, it'll probably take you back to that very moment, right?
Immediately, like fried sardines anywhere. Like I recently had a meal in Cochin at a restaurant, and they had fried sardines, and immediately and that's a powerful thing about food memories, right? It takes you back to those memories instantly. It's amazing.
I agree. So you first started actually with European food, And it was later that through your travels, decided to try out Indian food and explore more of that. And of course, at the Bombay Canteen, which you had such a great journey. And I've heard so many amazing things about the restaurant, and I haven't yet been to that place. So, how hard was it for you you left in December 2020 during the pandemic? How hard was it for you to let that go?
Honestly, it was hard for me to come to that decision. It's a decision that I pondered on for a very long time, a few years actually. But it came from a very like emotional place because it like I was perfectly happy in my role and my capacity at Bombay Canteen and what we did, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. But it came to a point where because to kind of help my work at the Bombay Canteen, I traveled extensively around India over the past 7 years. I've now traveled to about 23 states in the country just for food exploration. So I've eaten a lot. But through all those travels, I started feeling this strong sense of feeling disconnected from the source of our food, from what is happening at the grassroots level. And somehow, increasingly, I didn't want to be a spectator anymore. So this was a way for me to push myself out to figure out how I could maybe contribute to some form of tangible impact beyond what I was doing already. Yeah.
And you were already experimenting with indigenous varieties with the Bombay Canteen. You had, even with your menu or with your Wild Food Festival, where you got tribals to come and showcase the kind of food that they have. So, why did you think it was necessary for you to step out of that and do something more?
So again, over the years of like running the kitchen at Bombay Canteen and reimagining Indian food and having those larger conversations around social media and other forms of media and engaging with people in different ways, I realized that the work that we were doing was getting people excited about Indian food. It was getting people excited about local seasonal ingredients and regional cuisines in a way that nobody else really was doing. And slowly we were building like a lot of love around this idea of like indigenous Indian food. But for me personally, it wasn't translating to the kind of impact that I wanted to create. And like I was using a lot of my creative energy on like ideating on new recipes and new dishes and running the kitchen administratively and running a business. And so increasingly I realized that it's not like if I wanted to create that impact, it's not something that I could do in a silo. I believed in the power of bringing a larger group of people together. And in fact, like I'd even come up with a hashtag all those years ago called the Indian Food Movement.
Yeah.
Which was me trying to get this idea out there that like it can't be just me or a few people kind of pushing this movement forward. It has to be a larger collective of people. But I mean, that hashtag I created like maybe midway into my time at Bombay Canteen, but even it didn't translate to anything, So for me, I wanted to push myself out to see how I could kind of bring a larger group of people together. I'd come to know of a lot of incredible farmers, producers, organizations that had already made a lot of headway, but somehow their work wasn't reaching that larger audience. And there was no synergy that I was seeing in all of these people coming together. So, so I think, I mean, the Bombay Canteen was one part of that journey for me, but I felt like it was incomplete and I needed to step out to kind of take that on forward.
But yeah, it's true about what you said. There are amazing people and organizations doing about the Indian food movement, as you put it in your hashtag. But sadly, most of them work in pockets. So there needs to be something where all of you can collectively do something.
Yeah.
But talking about social media and hashtags, your hashtags have been trending for quite some time, like hashtag Chef on the Road and hashtag Indian Food Movement, which you just mentioned. So I'm really intrigued by your travels. Like when you decide to travel, for food exploration, how do you decide which region to go, where specifically to go in that particular state? Is there a lot of research that goes into it?
Yes, I'm actually secretly, or maybe not so secretly anymore, a geek I love planning. I love scheduling. I love being organized. So yes, a lot of the planning does happen well in advance. Initially, when my kind of like I didn't have the audience that I have today, I would reach out to my or network of people in the industry, people who I know of to be experts in that local area, or do whatever other forms of research I could. But increasingly over the last few years, I rely a lot of my itinerary on crowdsourcing. So I put it out there saying that this is what I'm looking for. These are the kind of experience that I want to have, and then I just open the floodgates, and like all these opportunities start coming my way, and I'm very grateful for it. It's a lot of them have been opportunities which the average person won't get to do. I get invited to people's homes, I get taken on trips foraging, I get to meet local communities. Like people go out of their way to kind of enable those experiences for me. So it is almost kind of like a responsibility for me to kind of translate that into what I do on social media. I think over the years I've developed like an instinct to choose and narrow down based on whatever comes to me, what's more valuable, and what I'd like to focus on, because there's a lot that you can explore, and I rely on my instinct to kind of make that final list. And then it's Excel sheets, it's like charting out a detailed itinerary. But again, I also leave. I always say that I leave like a 10% room for magic to happen.
Yeah.
So you can't be so tight in your schedule or your itinerary that like you don't account for other things to come your way and to make space for them. And I mean, earlier food chef on the road food trip was actually in 2013, where I traveled across France, Italy, and Spain, and this was for 4 months across 36 towns and cities.
Wow.
And even my first trip across India was 2 months across about 18 different towns and cities all over India. So while earlier it was about quantity, like now it's about just going deeper. So in the last 3 years, I've consciously shifted towards more intensive travel, connecting on a deeper level with the locals, spending time to understand how the historical, cultural, and political aspects of food tie together in that place. And I've realized that my takeaways have been far greater with this newer approach. And then I mean you also set expectations to be real. Things go wrong, it's not all fun and exciting like you see on social media. There are disappointing meals, there are things that you plan that don't go according to plan, but I mean it's okay. But like I get asked very often whether people can come along for these trips, and my response is that you won't like enjoy it. And I've found a bunch of my friends and like family who have taken on trips who've kind of gotten accustomed to it. But I'm actually for the Locavore. I'm trying to set up how I can make chef on the road trips more accessible to people and maybe take people along on future trips. So
Yeah, that's one of the approaches you're planning to do, right? Travel experiences.
yeah.
I've seen some of the videos that you have put on social media, and they actually look like an adventure by itself. But you said, we see only the good side of it, not always the cons. In that sense, when you go to a region, has it been difficult for you to find people with that ancient knowledge?
It was earlier, but increasingly because I have access to like more and more people. I think over the years now, people understand what I'm setting out to do. And I think I've seen a transition over the last, say, 7, 8 years of a renewed appreciation for local and renewed appreciation for indigenous and heritage. And so, like 7 years ago, when I went to Himachal, I couldn't find any options for local food. The only place I found any local dishes was at the Tourist Development Corporation restaurant, and out of a menu of 150 dishes, which had everything from Chinese to butter chicken, there were like 4 dishes which were Himachali. But I think times have changed now. If I went back then, if I went to someone's home, they would be like, why do you want to like eat something that's local? I'll make something more exciting for you. Today, I've noticed greater sense of pride, where people want to showcase their local. And I think a lot of it also comes from this sense of loss that we are starting to recognize, where a lot of these are at the verge of getting lost, right? Like recipe
Yeah.
traditions. And I think to some degree they understand that what I'm trying to do is bring more awareness and excitement so that we try and preserve some of these.
I'm sure you have many anecdotes, both good or bad, of your travels. Is there anything interesting or favorite one that you would like to share with us?
Um, there's a lot. I don't even know where to start, but one interesting, for me, like a really interesting thing, every time I go on these trips and I come back, people just think I'm traveling all the time. For the next 3 months after I'm back, they'll be like, "Oh, you're back. How was your trip?" Like my Goa trip, for example, was 10 days long, but on Instagram, it was spread over a month because I ended up putting about 110 posts and like over 1,000 stories. But it's an interesting phenomenon because it's been happening to me over the years, and like it's like people think I'm always traveling, even when I'm not. And I constantly have to tell them, no, I'm not traveling. Uh,
Even when I spoke to you over the phone, I thought, okay, you might be traveling somewhere.
and there have been years. I think in 2019, I had made 3 trips. I was on the road for close to 4 or 5 months in total. So there have been years when I've done like extensive travel there, but increasingly because I have my bandwidth is spread across multiple different things. Not as much time spent traveling as I would like to.
Okay. So coming to the Locavore, you started it in the hopes to preserve and educate people about a rich food culture. Can you talk about a little bit about it and how you plan to do that?
Yeah, so the Locavore was built out of this idea that can we create impact through all food in different ways, whether it's through altering people's perception around food, altering their buying behavior. Can we get people to act on certain ideas which might translate to positive change? So that's why our tagline is doing good through food. Um, and the way to do it, again, like I said earlier on in the conversation, can we bring together a bunch of people? Can we collaborate and create communities to do that? So the four-pronged approach, the way I see it, is storytelling is a big one, and that's
Right.
where one of my strengths lie. Um,
You write as well, correct?
yeah, I write as well. I love to. Back in the day, I was an editor at my campus newspaper in New York when I studied at the Culinary Institute of America. But I think we often underestimate the power of storytelling to bring about change. But I always felt like storytelling on its own doesn't isn't enough,
Okay.
because there are content platforms out there. What I wanted to then tie it back into is then connecting it to actual opportunities for people to engage with food in different ways. And so that's the second part of it, is the producers or the farmers. So this is producers, farmers, food brands from around the country who we feel are like doing something right. They're trying to bring about change in some part of the food system, whether it's through the kind of like inputs that go into our food, whether it's in the kind of packaging they use, whether it's in how they work with local communities around them or support them, whether it's in the workforce or what goes into our food and what nourishes us. The third part of it is community.
Okay.
I said, like harnessing the power of the masses. Can we build and nurture local communities around the country to actually come together and act on different issues, on different causes, to again kind of bring about change in different ways. So the idea is where Locavore becomes a catalyst for these communities, but they become entities in themselves over time. And then to then bring in like this experiential component to it is where the events and experiences comes in, where I think there needs to be something that's tangible for people. There needs to be something that's fun and engaging. And that's where whether I can kind of take people on travel experiences, whether I can do interesting food events around the country, virtual events. And For me, I think all of these ties in together to kind of enable us to like follow through with that idea of doing good through food and making a positive impact through food choices.
That's interesting. And Chef, like how we spoke earlier, there are some incredible people and organizations in different parts of the country doing some amazing work on the ground. But they're all in pockets and silos. How do you hope through Locavore to bring them all together and solidify this movement?
I think, and this is where I think I leverage a lot of what I've kind of absorbed and learned and gained through the years. I think I'm leveraging my network within the industry, my connections with farmers and producers, a certain credibility I've built with consumers, and my learnings of how all of these kind of interact with each other and impact each other in different ways. For us, I think the idea is to get people to first believe in the larger vision, and also figuring out how to make a lot of this more accessible and approachable rather than cumbersome or intimidating. The idea is to also then bring value to different shareholders, whether it's the producers or the consumers or these organizations that we're talking about. So it's a win-win for everyone simultaneously. What we are trying to build through the Locavore is a movement, and I'm also fully conscious that it'll take time, and I'm building this slowly. I'm trying to build it to make it last.
Do you hope to bring other chefs or nutritionists or anyone else who have knowledge in that area to come on board and help you with the be a part of the Locavore in the sense, to have, whether it's for travel experiences or dining?
Absolutely. The idea is to, again, like we're designed to be very collaborative. So partnering, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline where we're already starting to like discuss these potential partnerships. And it could be partnerships with literally any kind of organization. It could be a government organization. We are working on a UN initiative called Recipes for Change, for example. It could be with a bunch of chefs and restaurants. It could be with local schools and hotel management or catering schools, for example. But the idea is definitely to be collaborative. I'm not trying to do all of this alone. I'm not trying to for Locavore to be the kind of platform that's executing this change. But again, like I'm trying to for us to be a facilitator, an enabler, a catalyst, and that's how we've designed this. So yes.
When we talk about this back to roots food movement, the terms farm to table and organic gets thrown around a lot. But do you actually see it benefit at the source, the farmers? And is it really sustainable?
So I think the problem here is the greenwashing, which is basically, like you said, throwing these words around like organic and natural. And just like words for words sake is all superficial.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that has become the trend. And that's exactly why we started the Locavore partner program with different producers and food brands to as a counter to all the greenwashing. I think sustainability is not black and white like people make it out to be. It's like organic is amazing and non-organic is not. It's a lot of gray, and what we are trying to do is to dig in deeper and understand different farmers, organizations, food brands, producers. And so a lot of research for us goes into doing that and then translating that into information that is relevant, accessible to people. We do something called the Locavore Bite, where if you look at our producer page, you'll see where we've bifurcated information under like workforce and community and origin and composition and things like that. And we also try to equip people to ask the right questions and kind of make more informed choices, make more informed decisions, and over time be more and more conscious about how their actions and buying behavior impacts everything else. The belief is that once this awareness sets in, then the network effect of that is inevitable, and it can pass across families, across communities, across generations.
Yeah, in fact, when you mentioned Locavore Bite, that was actually something that I wanted to bring out also, because when I was going through your website, it was very interesting how it was like a chart, right? And then you have each factors on how you grade an organization on whether they're really sustainable and
Yeah.
how organic or so they are.
Yeah, and the idea there is that like nobody can be perfect. No organization can be perfect. Like we have organizations that fare really well in terms of like say the fact that they are chemical and pesticide free, that they follow natural farming techniques, that they also think about what goes back into the soil. But there are other organizations that work with local communities and see how they can empower underprivileged communities or minorities in their field. There are others that look into packaging and see, okay, how can we have the most sustainable form of packaging? But it's not to make a judgment about whether this producer is perfect or not. It's just more have a more transparent outlook towards them, and so by kind of being descriptive about where the producer stands on a lot of these different fronts, we can at least, I mean, there's a starting point. I don't see it as a solution, but it's at least a starting point for consumers to start like questioning these things a little bit more, start being more aware and make informed choices, like not just think of, okay, it's organic, I'm going to buy it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole counter argument to organic as well. Like, I mean, I think especially in the US, because the organic movement is so much more developed, there are large scale farms and corporate conglomerates who've got just like thousands of acres of organic farms, which are like completely degrading the soil. Most of it is packed in plastic and transported halfway across the country. So there are a lot of like it's a very nuanced food is a very nuanced thing. Like there are so many different parts of it. We're not looking at the political or geopolitical context of food. We're not looking at the cultural context. So that's what we are trying to do through the partner program and through the Locavore Bite.
That's really interesting what you just shared now. When we talk about how our own farming practices is, we are all aware that with the Green Revolution, a whole bunch of hybrid varieties and chemical fertilizers were used, of course, to help tide us over a food shortage. But due to this practice, India's lost out in many indigenous varieties. So from your travels and interactions with the local communities, do you see some of these varieties come back?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a movement towards bringing a lot of this back over the past decade. It's happening slower than I think it should be, but we are also constantly fighting against these larger startups that are pushing convenience-driven behavior, whether it's your 10-minute Swiggy delivery or we are conditioning consumers for convenience and to not have to think about where their food comes from or how it's grown, how it's produced, or who's growing it. And like we are conditioning consumers to like invest lesser and lesser time or money into their buying behavior. So there is that like kind of pushback coming from there, but there is also, like I said, more and more people who feel strongly, more powerful voices who are picking up on these ideas around sustainability and channeling their energies towards it in different ways, on different medium, in different fields and fields of work. And I think like maybe say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, sustainability was seen as something that's either boring and now it's become cool in a sense. And there's a danger in that, but it's also, I mean, it's definitely better than like being considered as boring or like something that people don't pay attention to. So there is a movement. It's happening slowly. But again, if we can harness the collective power of a lot of these different voices and organizations, I think we can push that movement forward a little faster.
Yeah, I think now people see sustainability as something that is more achievable and not something back maybe 10 years back. They thought, okay, why don't you say something practical, right?
Yeah.
But now they do see it as something practical.
And a lot of like misconceptions around it. There are a lot of preconceived notions that are set in people's minds. Like we spoke about organic, just like everybody thinks that organic means good.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these ideas we need to make more accessible to people. And so that awareness part of it is a big one, but in a way that people actually accept and are interested in it.
So when we talk about consumers, Chef, do you find a stark difference between, say, what an urban consumer eats compared to those in the tier 2 or in the rural areas?
Oh, 100%. I think in cities and larger towns, the diversity of what's on our plate has shrunken considerably. It's easy, like you can just do a easy experiment at home. You go and ask your mom and dad's generation, or your mom and dad, how much they ate, how many vegetables they ate growing up. And you ask, if you have grandparents around, you ask them how many vegetables they ate, and you'll see that, like, it's almost like a inverted pyramid. I've done this experiment when I've spoken to larger groups, and inevitably everyone's not eating more than 20-25 vegetables throughout the course of the year. Through my work at the Bombay Canteen, I was able to feature close to 150 vegetables on our menu. That's just grazing the surface. I mean, I had a self-imposed rule of not using anything that's non-indigenous, so I was kind of like forcing myself to be more creative around local produce. Um, and again, even in terms of cuisines and like the kind of dishes that we cook, like, I mean, like I said, my grandmom used to constantly experiment throughout the year, because the produce changed, the kind of dishes that came out of it would change. I think, and also the repertoire of dishes that we're eating is getting more and more homogenized.
Yeah.
Like the butter chicken culture is basically trickling down to our homes as well. On the other hand, in rural areas, I think a lot of rural areas is still largely eating locally, seasonally. But I think the fact that price points also factor into how they eat, and then that's a lot more complex in what is available to them, what is affordable, what the government is subsidizing, or what ration shops are providing. All of that also plays into it to some degree.
Okay.
What is ironic to me is that, I mean, in some of my recent interactions in villages in different parts of the country, there are people who are starting to, they are aspirational, right? So they want to eat more like how city folk eat. So earlier, like, I went on a a food trip in Maharashtra, where this tribal community, and I've visited them over the years, where in the first year they cooked these vegetables with barely any masala. The second year it was with maybe red chili powder and turmeric powder, and like a month ago when I visited, they had MDH masala in it. So just that, like, one example of where I've seen the transition change. Like, you see Coke bottles, for example, where, like, they otherwise would consume something that's a local refreshment of some sort. And the irony is that people in urban areas are trying to get back to how people in rural communities.
True.
So I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Could you share your own personal association of any local ingredient of or a wild ingredient that you grew up with and you kind of miss it now?
Um, I think one of my favorite vegetables to eat is the jackfruit seed. And my grandmom used to cook a lot of it every season, and you hardly see that anymore. It's one, like, just collecting those seeds, peeling them. It's a cumbersome process, and somehow, like, jackfruit has become one of those vegetables which people like are slowly forgetting, and like it's considered as, like, like boring food. And that's why one of our producers, for example, is a company called Eat With Better. They're trying to revive jackfruit and make it more accessible in a form that's more accessible. But I'm actually excited about what we're doing around wild foods this monsoon. And again, for those of you who are listening who aren't aware, wild foods are basically like vegetables, fruits, which are not cultivated necessarily, but are primarily available in forests, sometimes even in urban, like in cities. And like, in contrast to, say, restaurants like Noma in Copenhagen, where they've made an entire experience around foraged wild foods. And, like, interestingly, they're not a community or a culture that ate wild foods. In our case, like, if you, like, go 50 kilometers away from Bombay, for example, you'll see tribal communities that are still eating wild foods. And so, I mean, and I've had this experience in Kerala, in Uttarakhand, in Goa, in Nagaland. It's a part of our indigenous culture. But slowly, like I said, even for these tribal communities or rural communities, they consider what urban folk are eating to be aspirational, they're also straying away from it. So for me, it was very important to kind of build a larger awareness around wild foods, around these communities and what they're eating, to hopefully try and like change like the balance in some way. And we did a wild food festival where we at the Bombay Canteen in 2019, where we showcased, I think, over 20 vegetables from Maharashtra, over a 2 month period, and we kind of do it through an organization called Triple O Farms. And that was within the confines of our restaurant. It did really well. People were very excited. But this time around with the Locavore, I wanted to turn it into a project. So we call it the Wild Food Project, where
Okay.
and it's I think our first attempt at trying to harness the power of collaboration and the power of a community. We've kind of put together a team of I think 18 or 20 people from different walks of life. There's food researchers, there's chefs, there's photographers, illustrators, nutritionists, content creators, who all come together because they believe in this idea, and they are investing like so much of their time and energy into working on this project over the 2 month period. And we are just kind of 1/3 our way into it, and it's really like inspiring for me to see this like incredible group of people coming together, and I'm really excited for how it's going to play out over the next 2 months.
In fact, a few days back, you had posted something again with Triple O Farms, right?
Yeah.
And all the wild foods that they brought. And I was going through the stories where the vegetables were shown, do you know what this vegetable? And I was like, I had absolutely no clue what these vegetables are. And many of them I was seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
But that was incredible what was shown on social media.
Thank you. And it's also about like approaching this with nuance. Like one way to approach it would be to say, okay, let's create a marketing campaign around wild foods and let it be done. But we are taking it one step or multiple steps further to say, okay, again, like Locavore is entirely about impact. So how can we create impact through this project and create impact first and foremost for the communities that are the biggest stakeholders in this. So how can we be sensitive around what their needs are? Or there's a lot of different parts to this. So that's why it's important to bring like a bunch of people together, rely on experts, rely on people who worked with these communities or these ingredients before, and collate all that and like then move forward and execute on it.
So what can be done to make it a staple diet again in terms of like from the F&B industry or from the government? How can it be that it's not just a trend anymore?
Yeah. So I think for a trend to become a movement, and I think the movement is what we need, it needs to be like a concerted effort across industries, across consumer segments. There is a movement, there's a momentum around this that exists right now, like I said, which can be leveraged, but it needs to be come from different different parts of the food system. So I mean, how can the government incentivize in different ways? If there's something called ODOP, for example, which is one district, one product, which the government has launched, which highlights and promotes products within different parts of the country. I've seen a lot more products which are getting GI tags or geographical index tags, where it is kind of directly associating and connecting a particular product with a particular place.
Yeah.
I've seen over the years the like food media has played a very important role. I think I'm always very grateful for food writers and journalists in the country, because I think even more than chefs in the country, they've kind of kept working on these stories around local, around indigenous. And I do think today that chefs play a very important role in setting these trends and building these movements, because we've kind of become like the new superstars, right? Like chefs have become cool and people listen to chefs. Trends are built by chefs and on social media. So I think it needs to be like a combined effort and a movement. And I mean, it's a long shot, but I'm hopeful. I'm generally optimistic. So I'm hoping that we can leverage on the momentum that we've gained already.
In fact, millets have been really coming back and getting talked about a lot these days.
Yeah.
UN has declared 2023 as the International Year of the Millets through Indian government's proposal.
Yeah.
So, do you think these local superfoods, because they're so rich in nutrients, need to be rebranded again so that people will be willing to adopt it?
I think, I mean, definitely they need to be rebranded. But rebranded is one way to put it. I think before that, I think there's a certain perception around, in India at least, around foreign being superior to local and traditional. And I've seen this especially in smaller towns and cities. And this is a major challenge. And I think, like, for example, the current government celebrating local and doing these campaigns around promoting local is actually something that's positive, at least in my eyes, in helping make this shift to some degree of changing this perception and for us to actually take pride in local food. I think the quinoa story is a great example of like how things can like go wrong, because that's a food from South America that suddenly became trendy in India and farmers started growing it. But
Yeah.
there are again perfectly nutritious, like wonderful millets which nobody paid attention to. In fact, we did a dish at the Bombay Canteen called the barley and jowar salad, which was again like a nod to that to say like we can create delicious food around other grains as opposed to quinoa. I know that like I was approached by the one part of the government initiative that is working with the Indian Institute of Millet Research in Hyderabad, again around this International Year of Millets and how we can make it more approachable and more accessible. So there are initiatives that are working towards doing it. The rebranding is a good way to put it. I think like it has to be rebranding coupled with also accessibility, like for example startups and food organizations that are now focusing on local. So and I don't think it should be focused on specific ingredients, because it'll just become about that ingredient, right? Like so
Yeah.
like everyone's talking about bajra or jawar rotis, but there are other millets as well. So the conversation needs to be around millets and kind of dig in a little deeper. But I understand that like people don't also have the mind space to think so much. So you start with these larger ideas which kind of people can hook onto and then bring them into your world and get them to take further steps.
Okay. So the idea is to concentrate on ingredients in your local area rather than, say, something that came from the Northeast or the North.
Again, that's again slightly more complicated than that. There are different points of view on this. Like the carbon miles of like things traveling from the Northeast to Bombay is one, but there is also a lot of research and studies around why consuming just locally around you is valuable. But again, like I'll give you an easy example. Like for example, um, if you're talking about consuming locally within Maharashtra for a city like Bombay, you might actually have greater carbon miles in getting ingredients shipped by road from different parts of Bombay as opposed to say something shipped in larger, say by train from the Northeast.
Right.
So it's not as simple as like you have to get into the complexities of it a little bit. And unfortunately, we are not at a place where like we can't. I don't think we can directly go to saying okay, everyone eat local and eat only from your around your area. Like so, unless we get people excited first about just like regional Indian food and Indian ingredients, because we're still trying to we're not competing with Maharashtrian poha versus Naga rice, right? We're competing with pasta and pizza.
Yeah.
So I think I mean it's something to definitely keep in mind, but first step is to just like revive this interest and excitement and pride around Indian food. I don't think each local area has the markets to sustain it their production from an economic standpoint, for example. So it's a lot more complex than that than just saying eat just locally. And also, what does local mean to you? Like for me, it might mean India. For someone else, it might be a neighborhood. So we also kind of wrapping our head around like our different ideas around local, and we live in a digital world, so we're also exposed constantly to stimuli from different parts of the country. So I think it's also impractical to expect people to just consume locally.
Yeah, that's a valid point you put across. Um, so you work with companies already that are in the grassroots movement, but do you also hope to partner with food organizations and how they can slowly incorporate more of the local ingredients in their products?
Yeah. And again, that is the hope, and that is again, I think something that we'll do down the line. Like I said earlier, we are just starting out. As of now, Locavore is bootstrapped. I'm self-funding this. Um, we are working on it with a limited team, and I've understood this to be a time there where we are learning a lot as well. This is new territory for me. I'm approaching this with a lot of humility, but also a lot of curiosity and excitement and vigor. So definitely want to partner with larger organizations because typically they have larger reach, so larger scope of impact. But I think that'll happen a little bit down the line when we also have gained a larger, greater understanding of how we can translate what we're doing into actionable changes.
So, what are your immediate plans for the Locavore?
I think for now, I think it is in building a following of people who believe in this idea, who are willing to kind of act on it and support it, building that community, trying out these different ideas. I think the Wild Food Project is a great experiment for me to figure out how I can harness the power of community. Um, Working with the producers that we're onboarding and bringing value to them in different ways, and also figuring out the other pieces. Like we haven't yet gotten into how to create those experiences. We have some great ideas around events coming up. We literally launched like 3 months ago, so
Yeah.
just getting started. There's a lot of ground to cover. We're taking one step at a time. We have some amazing stories around food from around the country that we've done. I'm harnessing the power of like social media and crowdsourcing to do a lot of that. Yeah, so immediate plans are to kind of keep our heads down, focus on the larger mission, but also take it one step at a time.
Looking forward to the plans as we go ahead. But do you hope to make it profitable as soon as possible so that it's easier to scale?
Hope, yes. um, but again, there's a little bit of give and take. I think that the venture is multi-format. It's designed to be uh, monetizable from across different revenue streams, whether it's through the producers, whether it's through events and experiences, whether it's through larger partnerships with big organizations or consulting with them, for example. We could do strategic partnerships like that, whether it's through collaborations of different kinds. So there's a lot of ways that it can be monetized, but I think it's too soon for the Locavore to kind of double down on any one of those revenue streams to do that. I think I'm still kind of like wading through the water to kind of figure that out, and I'm not pushing myself to hurry that. But yeah, I mean, revenue streams are always a good thing. The idea is to, pun intended, make Locavore sustainable as a business. So hopefully sooner than later.
On a last note, chef, to understand the headspace you're in, it's very stressful for a chef to be in the kitchen during peak service time. So, is this a nice change for you to set at a pace that you're comfortable with?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I was a chef for close to 13 years, and I forgot what weekends were like. And now I can actually make plans and like meet them. And I think my first taste of it came from the lockdown, where suddenly everything shut and I was forced to just sit at home and just be. And I really valued that. I really cherished that. I thrived during the time. And actually, the idea for the Locavore materialized only after I left the Bombay Canteen. It's not something that I had thought of before I left. So, but as soon as I freed myself from having to work in the kitchen for 10 hours and like focus on that, I felt like my mind was opened up a lot more. So yeah, I mean, I'm loving every bit of it. I do miss doing service every now and then, but not to the point where I would want to go back. Very soon I want to get back into doing like, say pop-up dinners or events and like doing cooking in different ways at the end. And I mean, at heart, I'm still very much a chef. I plan to continue to cook. That is a very important form of expression for me, but not like a full-time job where I'm confined to one kitchen and one space.
So you're able to devote time to your singing and playing guitar as well?
Honestly, with the last year of working on the Locavore, no. Again, more my life is filled with ironies, but hopefully that's also the plan to make time for that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chef. It was such a lovely conversation.
Thank you, Mahati. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. As Maharani Talks completes 50 episodes, I would love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach me at Maharani Talks on Insta or at maharanitalks@gmail.com. Until next time, take care.